Welcome to the University of Washington and the Office of Public Lecture's special weekly series, Coexisting with COVID. I'm Hanson Hossein, co-director of the Communication Leadership Master's Program and your host. Every Thursday, with the help of some of the UW's top experts, we'll explore what could be our new normal as we adapt to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're doing so in partnership with the Graduate School, UW Marketing and Communications, the Population Health Initiative, UW Video, and my own Department of Communication. This evening, Love in a Time of COVID. It's a headline that invites a certain cognitive dissonance, almost as great as some pop culture faves such as Love in a Time of Cholera or Love Will Tear Us Apart, and my personal favorite, Lovers in a Dangerous Time. Finding love or staying in love is a challenge in the best of times. What happens when you throw a global pandemic into the mix? As you registered for this conversation, we asked you to use the Thought Exchange platform to respond to this prompt. How has your relationship or lack of one been most impacted? Here are the results. And a lot of you responded. So we'll be using Thought Exchange later for your questions to our guests. Joining us for this timely conversation are Pepper Schwartz and Julie and John Gottman. The Gottmans founded the world-renowned Gottman Institute. Yes, they're married and they specialize in couples therapy. John has conducted award-winning research on marriage and parenting. He authored the bestseller, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. Julie is a clinical psychologist who sought out for her expertise on marriage, domestic violence, same-sex relationships, and for her treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. The Gottmans have an eye to the future of therapy with their new effective software platform, which we'll discuss a bit later. Pepper Schwartz has devoted her life to furthering the fields of intimacy, sexuality, and women's well-being. She has written a number of books, including the 2 bestsellers, American Couples and The Normal Bar, The Surprising Secrets of Happy Couples. She's a renowned columnist who has served as the AARP's Love and Relationship Ambassador, and Pepper is also a relationship expert for the reality series Married at First Sight. What would you like to ask our panelists? Use the Thought Exchange platform to submit your questions and/or vote on which questions are most important to you. It's important that we hear from you for the second half of our time together, so please do use the QR code you see on your screen to share your thoughts. You can even snap a photo with that QR code with your smartphone or just follow the instructions on the screen. Well, Julie, John, and Pepper, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hanson.
So you heard me mention the Thought Exchange platform, and we had a lot of people respond to that. And the common denominator seems to be that people are scared, they're alone, they want to know how to make new friends in this new reality. Anxiety and stress are having a negative impact on their relationships, and they're also wondering about the future of online dating. So Pepper, how much does this initial reaction to the past couple of months either surprise or concern you?
Doesn't surprise me, and it does concern me. People who are afraid are not at their best. People who feel like they've lost control over their lives, can't predict the future in important areas like love and work. They're going to be very upset. And if they've lost community and they've lost connection, that's putting them in some jeopardy.
We have never experienced something like this in our lifetimes. How unusual is this situation when it comes to the work and the guidance that you provide to people in their relationships?
It's extraordinarily unusual, and I think this sequestration is actually unique. There have been times of fear and contagion before, like in the AIDS virus period, but nothing where the entire world has been put into what seems to some people like house arrest, and they're not prepared for it. Nobody has the skills or the expectation that they would have an unknown amount of time being kept, alone or with one partner in a constant interaction that they've never had before.
Julie, you've built this incredible career based on the research that you've done in terms of partners and people in a relationship in normal times. For the most part, these are very abnormal times. How has your research informed what you're seeing right now in terms of what you're hearing from people?
Well, John and I just recently completed a study of 40,000 couples worldwide who were entering into couples therapy. And what we found out, Hanson, was that those couples are far more distressed than we ever predicted. They're troubled more by trauma, by addiction, by depression, by anxiety, and so on. And all of this before COVID hit. So at this point now, what we are seeing is that relationships, especially ones that were distressed to begin with, are really, really suffering. They're really having a hard time because they don't have the tools that can equip them to manage conflict well, to negotiate for time and for space, to handle both their children or the lack of jobs, or perhaps having to work and take care of kids and homeschool kids at the same time. Those stresses are huge. And a lot of people are locked into a small little apartment, for example, in big urban centers, where going outside really, really feels dangerous. So it's a very difficult time. And as a result, we're seeing an increase in domestic violence. In China, when they began to open up after sequestration, divorce rates hit the ceiling. And here, anxiety and conflict are really taking a toll on relationships.
So, John, distress and suffering, as Julia said, I see you shoulder to shoulder with your wife, and you're obviously working very closely with her. I'm curious how your relationship is going, given the situation, speaking very personally, and what advice you might offer to yourselves and to all those people who Julie referred to.
Yeah, we're doing great. So, we live in a beautiful place, so does Pepper. And so we're able to take really wonderful walks with our new puppy and spend a lot more time together. We're working less, we're earning less money, we're spending less, and we're enjoying life a lot. But, I do think it is really tough for people to be on lockdown for so long. And also to lose income. 38 million Americans are out of work, and we hadn't experienced anything like this since the Great Depression. So a lot of uncertainty and lack of coordinated leadership, really. So it's hard to really have hope. And so a lot of people are feeling really anxious. And in relationships, we think it's very important that people be able to take time and listen to one another and have a stress-reducing conversation where they can really hear what their partner's feeling and worried about, and be an ally to your partner as this time goes on.
Hanson, can I jump in for a moment?
Sure, Julie.
There's a couple of other things that we really highly suggest couples do. One is look for what your partner is doing right, not just what your partner is doing wrong. And when you see them doing something right, even if they've been doing the same thing for 10, 15, 20 years, you thank them and thank them every time they do it. That culture of appreciation that you have a chance to build now, rather than one of criticism or resentment, can really make a big difference in terms of feeling a little bit better day by day being together when you're really appreciated.
Well, thanks for sharing that advice. And Pepper, I like to come to you next and thinking about, the situation as all three of you laid out. We are now at this inflection point as we're beginning to emerge across the country from the shelter-in-place situation. And obviously the title for this series is Coexisting with COVID. So I'm wondering, what kind of advice can you give us now as our situations begin to change, as we are emerging from this situation where we have been quarantined? What's the one thing that we should be doing or thinking about as we reconnect to people that we care about?
I think, first of all, to be grateful that we're emerging to see our friends, to re-enter the world. I think one of the good side effects of this experience has been to think about, what are the essential elements of life? Your partner, maybe your parents, maybe your children, maybe your dogs, whatever it is that makes you happy at the basic level of these are the most important things for me, is to keep that vision intact and not to get too worried about what you've lost, but to remember what you have. And then as partners or with the people that are close to you, try and really start thinking about how life shall proceed. It doesn't have to be the same as it's been. It could be modified. It could be better. It could be having to take some losses, but to remember again what you have. The fact that we're not among the many people who have died, that maybe we didn't have to go through this illness, or if we did, that we're here and we've survived it. There's a lot to be grateful for. And I think if you could keep this sort of good feeling of what's important in life and who you care about, that can help you go through almost anything.
So gratitude and appreciation. I'm curious, Pepper, whether people also had some realizations along the way. If you're stuck in place for a couple of months, you might actually have some revelations that sort of say, you know what, I don't want to live my life like that anymore, whether or not I'm single or in a partnership. What should we be making sudden movements now that we've had these realizations?
Well, the nice thing about having been sequestered for a couple months is nothing sudden. Hopefully, going back to what both of the Gottmans have talked about, hopefully you're talking about these feelings, sharing them, thinking about what they mean, planning for some either changes or re-embracing what's important to you. I think the open communication is really important. And if you have found over this time that it hasn't been there, that you can't reassure each other, that you can't talk, that you don't have a sense of a plan, this is a really good time to say, okay, we need to do those things. And when you do get out of sequestration, if you haven't been able to feel stronger and better together, or you don't want to be alone anymore, either way, you need to go see some help. I am a big fan of a third party talking to people. The Gottmans have shown us through in many ways how important therapy can be for a relationship. We now know that you can even get a lot of help digitally. We've really opened up, Zoom has helped us open up ways to have help without being in person someplace. But by all means, if people feel their life has been shattered or that it really needs to be restructured and they're intimidated by that, get some help.
Julie and John, I want to put this to you. I mean, absent a vaccine or testing, it looks like we're going to have to engage in some kind of social distancing for the foreseeable future. And it strikes me that even that term, social distancing, is incredibly incongruent with the idea of a relationship. So if this is going to be our new reality for the foreseeable future, how do we reconcile trying to stay physically and medically safe with our need to have relationships and healthy connections?
Well, first of all, social distancing is imperative at this time, as we have discovered from a couple of states who have reopened things there. As they eat in restaurants closely together, as they sit on beaches closely together, their COVID rates are skyrocketing once again. So, you know, you're absolutely right, Hanson. We do have to be very aware of the social distance that is helpful. However, what we can also do is, one, quarantine for a couple of weeks before visiting somebody and have that person quarantine also. I'm hearing a lot about pods, little pods of people who are quarantining very conscientiously in order to then gather together and without fear. So you might think about that, quarantining first, then being able to be a little bit closer. But at the same time, I think there's more dependence on using our words, using our faces, using our bodies when we can't necessarily hug and touch a friend who we may not have seen for a month or two.
I love that innovative approach and innovative thinking. And actually, it calls to mind, John, the first question we received on Thought Exchange that specifically called out some of your work, having spent 13 years studying how children make friends. John, do you have any insights on how we can make new friends and be social during these times? I love some of the advice and suggestions that Julie gave us.
Gosh, that's a great question. You know, this is a time when we realize how much we need other people. And I think the important thing is to reach out to people and let them know that you're concerned and you want to know how they are, and check in with your acquaintances, check in with your friends, and and just kind of touch base. We've been doing things like having virtual meals with our friends, and really enjoying it a lot, doing it on a regular basis, calling people, texting them. And I think that's the important thing, is to really let people know that you care, that they matter to you, that you love them, that they're important to you, and reach out. Julie's part of a phone network that is reaching out on Orcas Island to older people who are by themselves. Right? You want to say something about that?
Yeah, Orcas Island is one of the most amazing places for outreach to people in need. And we have about 2,200 seniors, and our senior center coordinated a bank of volunteers to call every single senior to check in with them, to see how they're doing, whether they have any needs,
Right.
whether the senior center can aid them, and if they would like, each of us were assigned a number of people to call. If they would like a once a week call from each individual who's assigned to them as a buddy, just to check in regularly, we are happy to do that. And it's built an incredible network for people to feel less alone, less isolated, more cared about, because that social contact, however it's made, is essential for well-being.
I think that's really good advice, especially because we know even before the pandemic that in the modern world there was an epidemic of loneliness. So thanks for bringing that to mind. Pepper, I wanted to ask you very specifically, because we received a question looking for advice about a relationship, and I know you've been giving a lot of that, especially with the television show that you support. I wanted to try this on you. I'm having trouble keeping my relationship going. I feel a lot of hostility, and it's due to the COVID stress and anxiety. Is there any way that I can keep the two separate? This person is trying to be as positive as possible, but also managing that stress and anxiety. It's related very specific to the virus.
Well, that's hard. Let's first not give any glib answer here. If people are terrified, it's hard to tell them to put that aside. But you might say we could have, COVID-19 free moments, and do something, because, as an academic, we live in our heads a lot, but a lot of people live just as much as in their body. So doing things, doing yoga, doing breathing exercises, a lot of them you can do online now, cooking together, doing a home project, being physically active, doing things, saying, we know this bigger worry isn't going to go away, but we're going to put it aside for some moment of sort of emotional and physical refreshment, and see if we can make a deal on something like that. Because I do know that some people are terrified, and it does in fact, bring out their less than compassionate, sweet side. But if you can say, okay, let's give ourselves a break for a while to kind of re-knit that connection, that could help.
That's really helpful. John and Julie, I'm curious, given the situation, how do we find love now? If you actually have room in your life for love because you're not in a committed relationship, what do you do to find a loving relationship given this crazy fog of war that is this virus?
That's a really good, we're not experts in dating. I need to tell you.
Well, I would say, what have you got to lose? Go ahead and experiment and meet people and have virtual dates, and and see whether you can find somebody where the time just flows, like milk and honey, where it really feels sweet, and you enjoy talking to somebody, and and have as many dates as possible. Before I met Julie, I had 60 dates in a row. She was number 61.
He
And
still calls me number 61, incidentally.
Do you think
So-
that given this dynamic and the fact that we've had to rely so much on technology even to remain connected to people, I mean, is
Right.
there a chance that the nature of dating itself and how we do find these in relationships might actually change moving forward?
I don't know, but it certainly is well prepared with all the dating sites out there. So you have your pick of thousands of potential people that you can connect with through dating sites, online dating, and so on. Pairing that together with lots of Zoom meetings, perhaps, with people. And you could probably date 600 in a week. I mean, imagine that.
Let me jump in on this for one moment.
Sure,
I have
Pepper.
spent a bunch of time on this. And I would say that this is a great time to date because for a lot of people, if they're just looking for a one night stand, they're not going to be on the internet right now because that's impossible, right? And I do think that this experience of being single in the time of COVID-19 has readjusted a lot of people's priorities, that maybe just hanging out and partying isn't what you need when life gets tough and you want somebody who has your back and is going to be there with you when the world is totally threatening. So I'd say you might be getting a different kind of commitment, different kind of interest and connection that is not trivial now. And so it's a good time to start talking to people.
So there's a great possibility or opportunity for depth is what you're suggesting, which actually leads very nicely into a question we received, and I want to stay on you for this, Pepper. Obviously, physically distant dating forces a slowness that has some advantages, what you're talking about, but it's hard not to be able to assess physical chemistry right now. A first kiss, a first touch, those things have always seemed important early in a relationship. How do we do that? How do we go about assessing the possibilities of those relationships without those physical cues?
Well, you're going to get physical cues if you're Zooming. It was just photo on the phone. Yeah, maybe not. But we see each other. We see smiles. We get eye contact. It's not unphysical. It's just not touched. I believe that should give people pretty good idea if they're drawn to somebody and that would develop. You know, I'm a big believer too that, you know, if you stick around enough to get to really know that human being, they will change positively in your attraction to them. I'm not somebody that believes that you know in the first 20 seconds. And I do believe if you have a template that only goes from A to A plus or A minus, and you don't have the whole, you know, you don't have a big range or spectrum, then, you know, I don't think you're a really good relationship bet, period.
All right, so we still have a chance. John and Julie, we have somebody who's requesting some relationship advice. My wife and I were already having great relational difficulties before the pandemic. What can we do to keep things neutral during this time? What can we do to keep things... Oh, yeah, what can they do to keep things neutral? I think they're just trying to keep their heads above water with this added problems, and they're married.
Okay, well, there's several things they can do. One is that looking for what your partner's doing right. Another is giving your partner compliments, telling them that you love the sound of their voice, that they look really nice today, that they just made a really intelligent comment. So giving compliments is really helpful. Another is, you know, it's impossible to stay neutral 24/7, but what you can do is replace perhaps your routine ways of handling difficulties that come up or emotions that come up in a more structured and helpful way. And what we have seen is that couples who are successful in their relationships bring up their needs by saying, I feel something. They can say, I feel upset, I feel stressed, I feel angry, sad, resentful. About what? I feel something about what? And you can't cheat and say, I feel like you're an idiot. That doesn't really work. So you stay away from criticism or contempt, say what you feel, and then about the situation. I'm upset that the kitchen is a mess. Then ask for what you need in a positive way. In other words, you don't complain about what you resent, but instead, would you please clean up the kitchen? Would you please drive carefully? Would you please wear a mask? You tell your partner what you do need so that they can shine for you, rather than all the ways they failed you in the past, which isn't going to work. That way, your partner may be a little bit more willing to hear what you need, to hear your feelings. And if you're on the listening end of this, do your best to listen to your partner with some empathy, tapping into what their heart might be feeling. And remember that even if you can turn towards your partner by responding in some little way positively to their bid for connection, you're building a stronger relationship.
That's timeless,
I would-
evergreen,
I would
beautiful
add-
advice. Go ahead,
I
John.
would add one thing you can do is buy one of these gizmos. It's a pulse oximeter, and find out what your heart rate is when things are not neutral. And if it's above 100 beats a minute, take a break and make an appointment to come back in a half an hour. And during the break, distract yourself so you're not thinking about the conversation you just had. And really relax. And when people's heart rate is staying close to baseline as they have a conversation, they're much more likely to be good listeners and not repeat themselves and not think they get more persuasive by yelling.
I love the fact that you're focusing on the physicality of our connection as well. I think that's really great advice. Pepper, as you look
Yes.
to the future now, I mean, obviously you've done a lot of research. You work with this television show where you've got couples who are sequestered away for a number of weeks. What's the one thing that you think that you would like to look into post COVID-19 that really raises a great research question that you would not have otherwise considered before this?
Well, tough question.
Yes.
I have thought a lot about, which couples found their relationship was deepened and which couples noticed it's fractured, and then which couples could address the fractures and which couples back away from it. I'm not sure. I always like to ask a question that I really don't know what the answer is. And I'd like to see how couples develop strengths under pressure and other couples do not, and what differentiates them, what we can learn from them. I think I'm hoping that couples have found something deeper and less trivial than the things they may have focused on before. And I'd like to know if that's happened. For example, I've heard people, complain, let's say, about their husband's absolute devotion to golf and it taking away from time, and then, on and on about the things that aren't being done in the household and whatever. And I'm not saying those things aren't true or real or something not to solve, but I think it would be interesting to find out if those things have receded in importance and other things have become much more prioritized. I'm hoping, and I think I'm saying this from what I've heard from friends and other people, that there's been a rearrangement of values that will profit people in the long run.
Julie and John, given that potential rearrangement that Pepper refers to, I'm wondering if you want to get a little sci-fi with me, because I'm curious whether this actually might get us to start thinking differently about how we connect with people, how we engage with families. I've just in the last few months, the Atlantic magazine had their cover story as being the nuclear family was a mistake. There's a science fiction series on Amazon called The Expanse, where a person could have multiple mothers and fathers. Are we possibly looking at a new future in terms of how we organize, how we connect, how we enter into loving relationships? Not necessarily in the next year, but maybe this disruption has managed to help us think differently, and it maybe will start making you think differently about the research or guidance that you give people? Or is it going to be evergreen because love is timeless and how we get along is timeless?
Well, I certainly think that you're right, Hanson, that this is really suggesting that the nuclear family may not be sufficient, that we really need small communities, as I was saying, pods before, or little groups of people. And there are communities of people who are forming now, or were forming until COVID, and raising their kids together, maybe eating together 1 meal a day, though they had their separate living quarters and so on. And that may prove to be a more socially productive way of living, a more nourishing and nurturing way to live. But one of the things that we really want to do research on actually is that we are very sensitive to the fact, along with the 38 million people in the country who have lost their jobs, that many people cannot afford therapy help. They have distressed relationships, they don't have the tools, and how can they get them? They can't afford workshops or therapy. So for the last 2.5 years, coincidentally, John and I created a little company called Affective Software that is creating an app, and that app can be used by couples in the privacy of their own home to assess their relationships, see where their strengths are and their challenges. And we made 87 little small videos that give couples instruction and role playing, both good and terrible, how to do it wrong, for learning the skills to help strengthen their relationships while they're in the privacy of their own home. They'll be able to do that on their phones or tablets, and we're launching this hopefully in August if all goes well.
So John, it's possible that what you and Julie have put together has, thanks to the pandemic, has accelerated the future. That we're talking to each other through this amazing technology. You'll be using new technology so people can find help for their relational challenges.
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to...
They don't have to pay too much for it.
And given the fact that we'll have to socially distance, we'll have to continue using this kind of technology. Well, I think that's a really great and significant way for us to end our time and conversation together as we think about the future of love and the future of our relationships and how we find help moving forward as we try to coexist with COVID. So Julie and John Gottman and Pepper Schwartz, thank you so much for this endearing conversation. And join us next week on Thursday, May 28th at 6:30 p.m. Pacific for our next episode, Supply Chains, Where's All the Toilet Paper? We'll be answering your questions with faculty guests Adam Dranowski, Jennifer Otten, and Joe Hang. You can register for the event free of charge at coexisting.eventbrite.com. And we'd love to start the conversation with you now. We're interested to hear, what household items have you had the most trouble finding? You can answer now by opening your camera app on your phone and pointing it at the QR code on the screen, or you can go to tejoin.com and enter the code 783-764-168. I'm Hanson Hossein. Thank you for joining us for Coexisting with COVID. Have a good evening.